Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation today. My name is Catherine Peck. I am the project manager for the Brunswick Street and Rainnie Drive Complete Streets project. Today, I will be taking you through some background on the project, as well as the concepts we have developed for the corridor. At the end of the presentation, you will be invited to provide your feedback on the concepts we have prepared. Complete streets are planned, designed, and maintained to make travel safe, convenient, and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities and using all modes of transportation. Complete streets follow a hierarchy: those who walk, followed by those who cycle, take transit, those who use shared vehicles, and finally those who drive alone. Priority is given to active and shared modes of transportation, with an emphasis on reducing the number of single occupancy vehicles on the road. A complete streets approach also considers the role that the street may play as a green space with places to rest, gather, or just stroll. This project is based on the Integrated Mobility Plan, or IMP. The IMP was adopted by Regional Council in 2017 and endorsed a new vision for moving people and goods. The IMP identified potential protected bikeways, local street bikeways, and multi-use paths to create an all ages and abilities cycling network throughout our urban center. Brunswick Street and Rainnie Drive are proposed as part of the protected bikeway network. This project will encompass Brunswick Street from Spring Garden Road to Cogswell Street, all of Rainnie Drive, and the portion of Gottingen Street that connects Rainnie to Brunswick. This presentation will focus just on Brunswick Street. Concepts for Rainnie Drive will be shared at a later time. While developing our concepts, we had several guiding principles that informed our decision-making process. We looked at how we can encourage cycling by enhancing user experiences and safety, by providing improved cycling infrastructure and the creation of the AAA facility. To do that, we're extending and connecting the Brunswick Street Bikeway from the Halifax Common to Cogswell Street, as well as to Spring Garden Road. The AAA facility will mean that we have raised and protected bike lanes with separation from both pedestrians and vehicles. We've also looked at how we can improve the pedestrian experience along Brunswick Street, providing ease of pedestrian movement along the corridor and a safe public realm. We'll do this through the provision of smooth, durable walking surfaces, universal accessibility best practices, such as depressed curbs, tactile warning indicators, gradual grade changes, and then making sure that we're providing buffered separation between pedestrians and cyclists, as well as pedestrians and vehicle traffic. We're looking at ways we can design the street to reduce vehicle speeds and doing a lighting review. In addition, we're looking at how we can improve the public realm and the amenities that are provided, so the street is not as a place to spend time, not just a space to move through. We're looking at how we can beautify the streetscape, so burying overhead wires where applicable, providing new decorative lighting, incorporating streetscape elements such as benches, public art, planting, looking at the role of the street in modern urban life, designing vegetation into the streetscape, and also recognizing the importance of the Citadel Hill National Historic Site that borders our project site on the west. We also recognize that Brunswick Street has many businesses and organizations that operate along its frontage. We want to ensure that we're maintaining functional uses along Brunswick Street to support those businesses and organizations. To do that, we will ensure that we're providing adequate loading areas for businesses and considering parking needs along the corridor. We will accommodate area loading. There may be time of day loading restrictions for deliveries and couriers. We will be maintaining the tour bus space that currently exists in front of Scotiabank Centre. We will look at how we can accommodate on-street parking, possibly through time of day restrictions as are appropriate, and providing accessible parking spaces at key locations. We will also look at vehicular use of Brunswick Street in the context of downtown Halifax. We will be maintaining north-south vehicular movement in the downtown area. We will consider impacts of our redesign on the function for vehicular traffic, ensuring appropriate access is provided to and from adjoining streets, and consider the role Brunswick Street plays as a truck route and gateway into downtown. To inform our design decisions, we had some design requirements within which we were working. We have to provide space for cyclists, space for pedestrians, as well as space for vehicles. For our space for cyclists, we are looking at a two-way bikeway or a bi-directional bikeway. We did consider the possibility of unidirectional bikeways, however, space constraints don't permit the construction of that facility. So for a two-way bikeway, we need a minimum of 3 meters width. We're also looking to provide a minimum of 1 meter between vehicles and cyclists. That is to ensure the safety of both user groups, and a minimum of 0.6 meters between pedestrians and cyclists. However, we would prefer to provide 1.2 meters. For pedestrians, we have a minimum of 1.5 meters required for sidewalk. Again, we prefer 2.1 meters, and a minimum of 1.5 meter boulevard or amenity space needs to be provided. In some areas, this may be reduced in order to ensure that we're providing all the facilities we need to provide. We also need to provide space for vehicles. Our minimum travel lane is 3.3 meters. That is based on Brunswick Street being a truck route. The minimum parking requirement is 2.2 meters. Where parking or a travel lane abuts a curb, an additional 0.4 meters is provided for gutter space. We also need to consider loading needs for businesses. All of these dimensions are taken from the Halifax Regional Municipality's Municipal Design Guidelines, commonly known as the Red Book, as well as industry best practices. We have developed 3 core concepts. We have summarized them as follows. We've titled them Green Space Priority, Balanced, and Pedestrian Priority. So on the previous slide, I mentioned our design requirements. Those design requirements allocate a certain percentage of the space that we have between our property lines for each user group. So we have minimums that are required for cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles. And then we have our leftover space or extra space. And our concepts determine how we are using that extra space. So for green space priority, any extra space we have is allocated to trees and other vegetation. This area could be softscape or hardscape and could potentially be used to provide amenities like benches, bike racks, art, and other street furniture. In our balanced approach, we divide the extra space equally or just about equally between pedestrians and green space. In our pedestrian priority option, all that extra space is allocated to pedestrian zones. This is creating sidewalks that are as wide as possible, giving pedestrians as much freedom of movement as possible, and providing the possibility for sidewalk cafes to be implemented in front of some of the businesses on the corridor without having to use the temporary sidewalks that exist currently. Before we move into the concepts, I want to go through a bit about how to read our diagrams. We've prepared a diagram for each of our concepts that I'm going to show you today, and we've set them up so they all use the same color scheme and imagery to make them easy to compare to one another. Like most existing older streets, the width of Brunswick Street varies. So the space that includes our sidewalks, boulevards, curbs, and roadway can vary quite a bit from one end to the other. Along Brunswick Street, we have 3 key dimensions. We will show the concepts as they apply to each of those dimensions. In the diagrams, purple represents pedestrian space, green is the landscaped area or landscape buffer, yellow is our bike lane, dark blue is hardscape buffer. This will be concrete or another hard surface material meant to show a separation between the adjacent surfaces. This may be used to separate pedestrians and cyclists or used to separate cyclists and cars as shown here. Gray represents space for moving vehicles, and finally light blue is space for loading and parking. So the first segment that we're going to talk about today is the southernmost portion of Brunswick Street, between Spring Garden Road and Doyle Street. If you at any point you need to orient yourself, you can check the map on the top right corner of your screen, and the segment that we're talking about will be highlighted with a red circle. So the portion of Brunswick Street that runs between the new Doyle building and the old public library has a right-of-way width of about 18.3 meters. Now this segment is actually already almost completely constructed already. Through negotiations with the developer, we did have the sidewalk and right-of-way reinstated to allow for the implementation of this bikeway. So the only thing that's going to change on this block is the construction of the bikeway between the existing sidewalk and the existing curb lane. The trees that exist there today will remain, and the bikeway will be constructed just to the west, and we will have a 1.1 meter hardscape buffer between the sidewalk and bikeway. The 1.2 meter landscape strip are existing drive lanes at 7 meters, and then the existing 3.1 meter sidewalk on the east-hand side in front of the old public library space. So now we're going to move north to our first segment. This portion of Brunswick Street runs from the south end of the Cambridge Suites Hotel to the intersection with Doyle Street. Our width from property line to property line is 18.3 meters. Now these two concepts do vary slightly from our core concepts, but this is a unique stretch of the corridor and we did want to evaluate them separately. So our first option does look at maintaining parking and loading on the west curb. So this option has a 2 meter sidewalk on the west side with a 0.6 meter hardscape buffer. In this instance, the hardscape buffer is going to be a half height curb. So instead of a full 6-inch curb, this curb is going to be 3 inches high. That grade change does create a detectable edge that can easily be followed by those using a visual aid for mobility, so using a cane or a seeing eye dog. The consistent grade change is easier to follow for many users than the standard tactile strip, and it also gives sighted users a visual cue that to divide the two spaces. We have our 3 meter bikeway and a 1 meter hardscape buffer. We have a 2.2 meter parking and loading zone, followed by 2 drive lanes, and then our sidewalk on the east side. We will be burying the existing overhead wires and replacing the Cobra Head highway style lighting with a more pedestrian scale decorative light. The sidewalk on the west side will decrease by about half a meter, so it will get slightly narrower, and that will limit our ability to correct some of the pinch points that currently exist on that segment. The narrower sidewalk and implementation of the bikeway will also limit the potential for seasonal patios for the businesses along this stretch. Because the sidewalk is narrower, those patios will likely not be possible any longer. The sidewalk on the east side does get a little bit bigger. There is an existing landscaped area between the retaining wall and the sidewalk on the east side, and we will reclaim that space and hard surface it so that we don't lose sidewalk space on that curb. Option 2 for this segment is our pedestrian priority option. So in this option, instead of keeping that parking and loading space, all the space, that space is now being allocated to the sidewalk. So we still have our bikeway and our 1 meter buffer. We have the 0.6 meter half height curb again, but in this example, we have a 4.1 meter sidewalk, which would mean that businesses along this corridor would be able to have a sidewalk patio without the need for temporary patio infrastructure like they have at this time. It would also eliminate the pinch points that currently exist at the corner of Doyle Street and Brunswick Street. The sidewalk on the west side will increase by 2.3 meters. The east side sidewalk does decrease by 0.35 meters, but we still get a generous 2.15 meter sidewalk. Existing loading activities would need to be relocated to Doyle Street, and parking would be removed for this segment. However, several public parking spaces were added in the parkade at the Doyle building when it was constructed. As we continue north along Brunswick Street, we come to our second section of the corridor. This section runs from the south portion of the intersection of Sackville and Brunswick Street along the frontage of the Department of National Defense property and the Cambridge Suites Hotel on the east. This segment is 17.3 meters wide. That is measured from the face of the retaining wall at Department of National Defense to the property line on the east side in front of Cambridge Suites. For option 1, our green space priority option, we get a 2.3 meter sidewalk on the west side. That is an increase of about a half a meter. We have a 1.2 meter treed buffer, adjacent to our bikeway, our hardscape buffer, and then our drive lanes. The east curb remains where it is, and the sidewalk on the east side remains unchanged at 2.7 meters. We will be burying any any overhead wires that exist along this segment and replacing the existing highway style Cobra headlights with new decorative street lighting. This option will correct the pinch point that currently exists in the sidewalk at the corner of Sackville and Brunswick Street, creating a clear pedestrian corridor and ease of movement along this route. Due to the space constraints that we have, we are unable to maintain parking along this segment. Option 2 for this section is our pedestrian space priority option. So for this option, we have a 2.9 meter sidewalk on the west side, so that is an increase of 1.1 meters over what is there currently. We then have a half-height curb separating the sidewalk from the bikeway, so that is a 0.6 meter curb width with a 3-inch grade change. Our bikeway, a 1 meter hardscape buffer, and then our drive lanes, and again, the east side curb remains unchanged with a 2.7 meter sidewalk on the east side. Again, we would be burying any existing overhead wires, putting in new decorative lighting. In this option, again, due to the space constraints, we are unable to retain the parking that currently exists. Due to space constraints, we don't have a balanced option for this segment, so we just have the pedestrian priority or green space priority along this segment. As we continue north along the corridor, we come to segment number 3. This segment runs from Carmichael Street at the north end to the Sackville and Brunswick Street intersection at the southern corner of Citadel Hill. The width of this segment is 21 meters. That is measured from the face of the retaining wall at Citadel Hill to the property line, which is typically the building face on the east side. So option 1 is our green space priority option. In this option, we have a 2.6 meter sidewalk on the west side of the street. That is a decrease of 0.2 meters over the existing sidewalk. We have a 2.35 meter landscape buffer, our 3 meter bikeway, a 1 meter hardscape buffer, 2 drive lanes, and then parking or loading curb access on the east side. The east curb remains unchanged, and we have a 2.7 meter sidewalk remaining on that side. Parking has been removed from the west side or Citadel Hill side of the corridor for this segment. We will be replacing the existing highway Cobra headlights with a more decorative light fixture. Next, we have our balanced option. On the west side, we have a 3 meter sidewalk, followed by a 1.85 meter landscape buffer, the 3 meter bikeway, and our 1 meter hardscape buffer between the bikeway and the drive lanes. All other aspects remain the same. We have 2 through lanes, a parking loading curbside access on the east side, and our 2.7 meter sidewalk on the east side. The 3 meter sidewalk increases over the existing sidewalk width by about 1/4 meter. Again, west side parking is removed for this segment. We will be replacing the existing highway style lighting with a more decorative light fixture, and we have that generous buffer to allow for trees and street furniture and other public amenities. The third option for this segment is our pedestrian priority option. In this option, the sidewalk on the west side increases by 1 meter to 3.75 meters. Our landscape buffer is 1.2 meters, followed by our bikeway, hardscape buffer, drive lanes, parking and loading, and then the east side sidewalk. Our landscape buffer for this concept is wide enough to allow for trees, likely in a hardscape situation, possibly with benches and other street furniture. We will also be replacing the existing highway style lighting with a more decorative light fixture. And as in the previous 2 concepts, parking has been removed from the west side. We now come to our final and largest segment. This is both the longest and widest portion of the corridor. This runs from Cogswell Street on the north end to Carmichael Street on the south end. The width along this segment is 23.3 meters. That is measured from the face of the Citadel Hill retaining wall to the property line or building face on the east side. And then north of Duke Street, we are measuring property line to property line. So for our first option, green space priority, on the west side, we have a 2.6 meter sidewalk. That is a decrease of 0.2 meters over the existing sidewalk width. We have a 4.2 meter landscape buffer, which gives us the potential to have a double row of trees along this segment and generous space to provide other public amenities. We have our 3 meter two-way bikeway, 1 meter hardscape buffer, 2 drive lanes, a parking loading lane on the east side with curbside access, and then the existing 2.6 meter sidewalk. That east side curb does remain unchanged. And on this segment, where we are fronting the Scotiabank Centre, the existing tour bus stop would remain. Again, as with previous options, the existing highway style lighting will be removed and in favor of some more decorative style pedestrian scale lighting. Our second option for this segment is our balanced option. We have a 3.5 meter sidewalk on the west side. That is an increase over the existing sidewalk of about 3/4 of a meter. We have a 3.3 meter landscape buffer, our 3 meter bikeway, 1 meter hardscape buffer, our 2 drive lanes. Parking and loading is maintained on the east side, and a 3.2 meter sidewalk on the east side as well. The 3.3 meter landscape buffer is generous enough to provide some public amenity space, including potential for benches, other seating areas, bike racks, and waste receptacles. We will also be replacing lighting with a new decorative pedestrian scale lighting instead of the highway style Cobra headlights. As with the previous option, curb access and parking on the west side of the street has been removed. Our third option for this segment is our pedestrian priority option. On the west side, we have a 5.6 meter sidewalk that is an increase of 2.8 meters, so about double the existing sidewalk width, a 1.2 meter landscape buffer, our 3 meter bikeway, a 1 meter hardscape buffer, our 2 drive lanes, and again, parking and loading is maintained on the east side, and the sidewalk on the east side doesn't change. Our wide sidewalk will allow space for patios with no need for temporary patio infrastructure, and we will be looking at new decorative lighting in place of the existing highway style lighting. As with previous options, there is no parking, loading, or curb access on the west side of the street. So that concludes our concept presentation. As we've talked about, we have 3 core concepts: green space priority, balanced, and pedestrian priority. The key difference between the 3 concepts is how the space that's left over after we allocate our drive lanes, parking and loading, bike lanes, etc., how we use that leftover space. Do we give it all to green space for amenities, benches, bike racks, trees, and other vegetation? Do we give it all to pedestrians, having sidewalks that are as wide as possible, allowing the possibility for sidewalk cafes to be implemented without the use of temporary sidewalks? Or do we divide that space equally, sharing it between pedestrians and green space? So that concludes the concept presentation, and now we want to hear from you. We have a survey posted on our Shape Your City website. If you're watching on YouTube, there should be a link in the description below. If you're on our Shape Your City site, once you leave the video, you can scroll down to the survey option and follow the link there. The survey will close on September 30th, and then we will prepare our What We Heard report summarizing the feedback we have received, and that will be published on the Shape Your City site by the end of October. We will proceed into functional design for the 3 concepts. Functional design will include analysis of the intersections, what changes may be required, how bicycle signals will need to be incorporated to safely accommodate the two-way bikeway at each of the existing signalized intersections, and the recommended functional design could end up being any of the 3 concepts presented today, or a hybrid of all 3 or 1 or 2. We aim to have functional design completed by the end of December, at which time we will also be visiting the variance committee should our preferred design require any changes to our current standard cross sections that were discussed at the beginning of the presentation. Once we have come up with our preferred design option, a report to council will be prepared, and we aim to take that to council by March of 2022 so that we can proceed into detailed design. We will be doing further public engagement as we progress through the project, so please keep an eye on our Shape Your City site for more information. Again, thank you for taking the time to view this presentation today. My name is Catherine Peck. I am the project manager for the Rainnie Drive and Brunswick Street Complete Streets project. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me directly, and I encourage you to take our survey and make your opinion heard. Thank you so much.